Personally, I was looking forward to this European regional more than I've looked forward to one in a long time. 5 of the teams in the top 8 before the start of this regional came into the split after making a roster move, including Vitality bringing in Zen, who's one of the most hyped up rookies we've seen in a very long time. So we came into the split with a lot of unknowns, and the only way to start figuring those out would be on the field. So let's go ahead and get into the recap. So let's start off in the first round, because in this tournament, things got pretty interesting pretty quickly. We had a bunch of standard results with the top seed winning pretty easily, but we did have 2 series where the favorite got a pretty big scare by going all the way to 5 games. First, Team Vitality and their new pickup Zen went all the way to 5 games with the new look Team Quadrant roster. And while Vitality did win the last 2 games of the series to go into the next round, it was still a pretty shaky start for them. And the other team that got a pretty big scare was G1 with their new player Oli, who went all the way to 5 games with Guild. But they also closed out the series in the 5th game to go on to the next round. But on top of those close series, we did also have 2 upsets, with the first one being Suh taking down PSG Tundra, who was formerly known as German Amigos. And while this of course isn't an ideal start, the only team that was favored that got off to a worse start was Oxygen Esports, because after bringing in EXO to replace Rise, they got swept 3-0 in their first series going up against Hogan Mode. And that Hogan Mode roster featured Growly, Rezi, and Scrubkilla, the Rocket League legend who hasn't made a main event appearance all season. But now that he's made his first appearance, he and his team got off to a really good start. And that start almost got even better in their next series against Moist, who had just brought in Cash. That series went all the way to 5 games, with Moist winning the first 2 and Hogan Mode winning the second 2. But Moist closed out the series in Game 5 with a 1-0 victory. Then Suh, the other team who got an upset in round 1, almost got another upset in this round going up against Team Liquid. But after going into Game 5 after a 7-2 victory for Suh in Game 4, Team Liquid locked in and they got this game win to go on to the next round. Then Team Vitality got another win, this time over G1, taking this series in 4 games, knocking G1 down to the lower bracket in the process. And finally we had K-Corp, the best team in Europe, going up against Team BDS, the former best team in Europe, who had just brought in Rise to try to get back to their winning ways. And while K-Corp ended up winning this series in 4 games, every game was decided by only 1 goal, so BDS showed that they can at least keep up with them, and that'll be important later on in the tournament. In the first round of the lower bracket, we had Guild sweeping Quadrant, and we had Williams Resolve beating Wild in 5 games. Then PSG Tundra got a scare from 2.5 Men, a team featuring Toxic, Rizex, and Speed, who's another player that we haven't seen in a pretty long time. But PSG got the win in 5 and moved on to the next round. And the last match of this round was Oxygen against Monkeys. Monkeys, who were previously known as Sonics, have had a pretty decent season to this point, but after picking up Raziers to replace Arju, expectations for them were a little bit higher. But getting Oxygen in the lower bracket of round 1 is a pretty tough draw, and it ended up being too tough for them to overcome because they lost the series in 4 games and got knocked out of the tournament in the first round. But the second round in the lower bracket would be just as entertaining off the field as it was on the field. First things first, we had Scrubkilla and Hogan Mode continue their winning ways with a 3-0 sweep over Williams Resolve, and Suh kept their pretty good tournament going with a 3-1 win over Guild. But in the next round, we had PSG going up against G1. And while both of these teams are considered to be pretty good, this series wasn't the close one you would expect, because G1 got swept on their way to being eliminated. And this loss for G1 prompted this tweet from Mark8, which is just so cold, I'm not gonna lie to you. Between this tweet and the tweet that he had after BDS lost in the last Spring Major, he needs to be in the Twitter Hall of Fame. But after Mark8 pulled out his Twitter fingers, Rise got the chance to pull out his after Team BDS beat Oxygen in 5 games, with Rise getting the win over his former team. And after knocking out his old team, he sent out this tweet, which was referring to the tweet that Oxygen sent out after they went their separate ways, relegating his farewell to the replies. And this was arguably even colder than Mark's tweet. But social media was kind of going crazy after day 1, and of course, I loved it. But now going into day 2, the first match in the next round of the lower bracket was Hogan Mode against Suh, featuring 2 teams that needed upsets to get this far. But after 4 games, Hogan Mode got the victory and secured that Scrubkilla would make it all the way to the top 6 in his first event back in the RLCS, which is pretty awesome for him after being gone for so long. And the other match in this round was Team BDS against PSG. And while both of these teams might be French in name, only one of them actually has French players. And just like they always do, the French players ended up winning this match by beating PSG in 4 games and knocking them out of the tournament in the top 8. Next up, in the upper bracket, we had Zen and Team Vitality get their biggest test of this tournament so far with the new roster, as they had to go up against the French super team in K-Corp. But to a lot of people's surprise, Team Vitality passed this test very comfortably because they won this series over K-Corp in 5 games, going on to the upper bracket final. And while the whole team looked pretty good, Alpha 54 looked especially good. because he was involved in 12 out of Vitality's 17 goals this series, scoring 8 of those himself and assisting another 4. But after a day full of 3-1s and 4-1s, we finally broke that trend in the next series with Team Liquid going up against Moist. Moist got off to a really strong start in the series, winning the first 3 games, with all 3 of them going in overtime. So while each individual game was really close, the series itself wasn't that close. But then Liquid bounced back to win the next 2 games, and after Moist called a timeout following Game 5, the timeout buff didn't come up for them at all, because they lost that next game by a score of 7-3. And after one more win for Liquid, they pulled off the reverse sweep in the best of 7 and moved on to the upper bracket finals. Now going back to the lower bracket, we had K-Corp going up against Hogan Mode to see who would make it to the top 4. And Hogan Mode had a really good tournament to this point, but unfortunately, this is where it had to come to an end, because Karmine Corp got this series win in 5 games. But before we move on from them, there's one thing that has to be brought up about Hogan Mode. When Scrub Killer was at his peak, arguably his best trait was his defense all over the field. So it's only right that in his first appearance in the main event this season, his team had statistically the best defense by allowing the fewest goals per game at only 1.75 out of all teams in the event. So yeah, that's pretty dope. And for the last match in this round, Moist tried to bounce back from their reverse sweep defeat to Team Liquid by getting the victory over Team BDS. But after they lost the first 3 games in this series, it didn't look like that was going to happen for them. But then after that Game 3, they called a timeout and bounced back with a win in Game 4 to try to get their own reverse sweep started. And then in the next game, they lost 6-3. So they weren't able to get their own reverse sweep, unfortunately for them. But a top 6 finish is still a really solid showing for this team's first event together. So now we transition into Championship Sunday, and we had a great match to get us started, because we had Team Vitality going up against Team Liquid to see who would be the first team to go into the Grand Finals. Vitality got off to a fast start by winning Game 1 6-1, but then the rest of the series would be a lot closer. The next 3 games were all decided by 1 goal, including Games 3 and 4 both going into overtime. And at the end of these 4 games, the series was tied at 2-2. And in Game 5, we see Redosin, the player that gets the least hype from the community, get the goal on Atto in a 1v1 situation to give Vitality the win in Game 5 and put them on series point. And that Game 6 went all the way to overtime, where we then see Zen get the dunk on Atto to keep the ball in Vitality's offensive half, and then he gets the bump on a Chronic to keep the net clear, for Redosin to come in and get the easy goal to send Vitality into the Grand Finals. There's been some conversation about Zen not having the statistical impact that a lot of people expected, but it's unselfish plays like this that have really, and they cut off the replay. Why did they do that? Okay, well the next match was K-Corp against Team BDS, and a rematch of a series that we saw earlier in the tournament, with K-Corp winning that one 3-1. K-Corp got off to a good start in this series too, by winning the first game, but then BDS got the next 2 to get a series lead over K-Corp for the first time this tournament. And after K-Corp bounced back in Game 4 to get that win, we would find out that that would be K-Corp's last win in this tournament, because BDS took Game 5 and Game 6 to knock out K-Corp and move on to the lower bracket final. And with this loss, this meant that this would be the first event all season where we didn't see K-Corp make it to the Grand Finals, which is of course pretty disappointing for K-Corp, but it's not too bad of a loss or anything, because they of course still have a really good chance of making it to the major. But after a long season full of struggles, Team BDS had to be ecstatic with this result, finally making it into the top 3 for the first time all season. And they already have given themselves a huge boost to their major chances, which is in turn a huge boost to their World Championship chances too. And they could boost both of those chances even more if they got the win in their next series in the lower bracket finals over Team Liquid. But even with the great form that Team BDS was showing, Liquid showed that they weren't going down as easily as the Winter Major champions, and they got this win over BDS through a 4-0 sweep. And this series featured a dominant performance by both Oski and Atto, who were both involved in 10 and 9 of Liquid's 13 goals respectively. But now after this, we finally head into the Grand Finals, with Team Vitality having the extra life in this matchup, going up against Team Liquid, who would need to win 2 series to walk away as the regional champion. In the first 4 games, these teams traded wins, with Vitality winning Game 1 and 3, and Liquid winning Games 2 and 4. So this gave us a huge Game 5, with each team looking to go up to series point. Then that Game 5 went all the way to overtime and was finished off by a crazy goal. Oski got this shot off a double flip reset that was saved by Alpha. Then Atto comes in for the follow-up, and that's again saved by Alpha. But he can't get any power on the clear, so Oski's able to come in and finish off what he started and get the goal for Team Liquid to put them up 3-2 in the series. But then after Game 6 went into overtime, we see Vitality get the goal this time, giving them this win and sending us all the way to Champions Field for the potential last match of Championship Sunday. In Game 7, the game is tied at 1-1 with just over a minute left. And so far this tournament, Zen had been playing really well and he's been doing his part to help Vitality get to the Grand Finals. But for the entire event, he was 6th from the bottom in goal participation percentage, so he wasn't having the statistical impact that many people expected him to. But when his team needed him most, he stepped up and made the play to win them the championship. He starts off with an air dribble to send the ball into the other side of the field, but with Oski bumping him off the ball, he can't control it for as long as he would have liked. So Alpha hits it off the back wall, and Atta goes for a clear, but he gets a really poor touch on it, and it goes straight to Radosin. And he also hits it off the back wall, and with Oski diving in to try to challenge him immediately, when he doesn't get contact, he takes himself out of the play. And this means that Chronic, Team Liquid's best defender, is stuck defending this Vitality push all by himself. But his position gets a lot more awkward when Alpha bumps him into the goal. And with the way that Chronic lands in there, the fastest way for him to recover is to drive through the goal and come out from the roof. But when he does that, he comes way too far out of the net. So he's no longer in a position to defend a shot when the next Vitality player gets to the ball. And that's very bad news for him because Zen is already lining it up. So with the Chronic's positioning in goal being a bit off, and Zen having all the time and space in the world, he sends in this shot at 86 kilometers per hour, giving Vitality the last goal of this tournament, and also giving Vitality their first event win since the RLCS X European Championship almost 2 years ago. So after just one event in the RLCS, Zen is already a regional champion. And honestly, with how little he was involved in this team's offense, you have to feel like he and Vitality haven't even scratched the surface of what this team can do. And that has to be a terrifying thought for everybody else in the region. So with Europe out of the way, let's get into the best of the rest. And we'll start with the best of the rest as we head into South America. And I'm going to start off with the bad news. Exceed was easily the biggest surprise out of this region in the last split because they went from being an unknown team to being one series away from making it to the major. But the start that they got off to in this split wasn't nearly as good. They got swept by W7M in the upper bracket second round, and then in the lower bracket second round, they went up against Timeless, which should have been an easily winnable matchup for them, but they lost there by a series score of 3-1. And with that, they were out of the tournament. But besides that, there were no huge upsets. In the matchups to determine who would make it into the top 4, we had NIP, who had just replaced the South American legend Kaio with Mata, beat W7M in 6 games. And then we had Era, who was known as the club last season, beat True Neutral in a 4-0 sweep. And that True Neutral team once again has Shad, who has now officially gone full circle and went back to the team he dominated RLCS X with. And with those results, we go into Championship Sunday. And while the matches we got here were pretty interesting, they also showed us that South America is now a region that's dominated by 2 teams. The upper bracket final between Crew Esports and Team Secret gave us a really defensive battle, because in the first 6 games, Crew only scored 8 goals and Secret only scored 7. But Game 7 of that series also gave us the highest scoring game, with both teams holding nothing back. But in the end, Crew got the win over Secret by a score of 4-3 to advance on to the grand finals. Then in the lower bracket semifinal, we had Era Eternity get 3 straight shutouts over NIP to take that series by a score of 4-1. And then right after that, Team Secret gave Era a taste of their own medicine by shutting them out in Game 4 and 5 on their way to a 4-1 victory over Era. So in the grand finals, we had a rematch of the upper bracket final and a showdown between the 2 definitive best teams in the region, between Crew and Team Secret, who would need the bracket reset. And this series in the grand finals was just as close to their series earlier in the tournament. And it was also nearly as defensive, because the 2 teams were trading wins back and forth all the way through the series. And after 6 games here in the grand finals, these 2 teams had only managed to score 9 goals each. But the Game 7 we got this time wasn't like the Game 7 we got last time, because in the last Game 7, both teams scored a lot of goals. But in this Game 7, only one team scored a lot of goals, because Crew got the dominant 3-0 victory over Team Secret to prevent the bracket reset and solidify their second regional win of the season. And now after a full season of multiple teams contending for the top 2 in this region, it looks like Crew and Secret might be pulling away from the rest of the pack, but we'll only know that for sure after the next South American regional. Now quickly getting into the last 2 regions, first up in APAC, we had Elevate start their road to redemption by winning this regional after dropping only 1 game in the entire tournament. Even though they missed out on the last major, it was still pretty hard to say that this team wasn't the best in the region. And now after this dominant win, it's almost impossible to deny. And finally for Sub-Saharan Africa, we once again only have one question to ask. Did Limitless lose? And the answer this time is no. They won this regional and only dropped 3 games in the process. And this is a good bounce back for them because in the last regional of the winter split, they had their first tournament where they didn't win. So now after getting the win here, they're right back on schedule. Alright, that'll do it for today. If you want to hear all of my hot takes that are too dumb to make it into a video, join my Discord, link in the description. Alright, now go drink some water and make sure you're sitting up straight. Gotta take care of your back. And finally, thanks for watching.